You know that nagging pressure to find a calling, not just a job? Well, that feeling isn't some new age invention. It's actually a 500-year-old idea that kicked off with a rebellious monk and totally reshaped how we think about our careers. So let's dive into how this piece of history is still pulling the strings in your work life today.
Yeah, this whole question, is my job a calling or is it just a grind? It comes directly from a theological earthquake that shook the world half a millennium ago. And it didn't just shake up the church, it completely shattered our concept of work. We're still feeling those aftershocks every time we update our resumes.
All right, so our story kicks off in the 16th century with a guy named Martin Luther. Now, he wasn't trying to invent a new work ethic or anything, but his challenge to the church ended up sparking a full-blown revolution in how we see our 9-to-5s.
So before Luther, the big idea was something called contemptus mundi, which is just a fancy way of saying contempt for the world. Basically, it meant that the only jobs with real spiritual value were the sacred ones, like being a priest or a monk. If you were a blacksmith or a farmer, your work was just a thing you had to do to survive. It didn't have any higher purpose.
But then Luther comes along and just flips this whole idea on its head. He started arguing that any honest work could be a vocation, a divine calling from God. All of a sudden, the sacred wasn't locked away in a monastery. Your workshop, your farm, heck, even your office could be a place of holy service.
And you gotta understand, this was way more than just personal fulfillment. For Luther, it was a blueprint for how society should run. Your job became the primary way you served your neighbor. Baking good bread, building a sturdy house. These weren't just jobs anymore. They were real, tangible ways of expressing your faith.
And that, right there, is the heart of his revolution. It was a democratization of spiritual purpose. Suddenly, the farmer and the priest, the shoemaker and the scholar, they were all on the same spiritual playing field. This simple idea laid a completely new foundation for how the Western world thinks about work.
But hold on, the story doesn't stop with Luther. Let's bring in another major player, John Calvin, because he takes this idea and twists it into something that starts to look, well, a lot like our world today.
So if Luther opened the door to finding meaning in work, Calvin kind of pushed everyone through it with a whole new sense of urgency. While Luther was all about serving your community, Calvin added this intense layer of self-denial and discipline. For him, work was about glorifying God through relentless focus and piety.
And this mindset created a really powerful economic loop. You can almost see the DNA of modern hustle culture right here. The logic went like this. You work like crazy to glorify God. If you get rich, that could be a sign you're doing it right. But you can't spend that money on fancy stuff. You have to live simply and reinvest the profits. So you just work, grow, and repeat.
Now, this is where a religious idea leaps into economics. Decades ago, the famous sociologist Max Weber pointed out that this exact cycle, hard work, simple living, and reinvesting profits, was a key ingredient that helped fuel the rise of modern capitalism. A theological argument had massive, system-changing consequences.
Okay, so let's hit the fast-forward button. Because this idea of work as a calling didn't just get frozen in time. It kept evolving. And in our era, it's taken on a really vibrant new form.
Yep, in the 20th and 21st centuries, Pentecostal theology has breathed new life into this whole conversation. They'd basically taken that old Protestant work ethic and injected it with this modern sense of direct, personal spiritual power.
For Pentecostals, work isn't just a duty or some distant calling, it's an active place for a spiritual encounter. The idea is that the Holy Spirit is right there with you, empowering you for your daily tasks, whether you're writing code or managing a store. It completely tears down the wall between your sacred and secular life.
And this quote just nails it. It's saying we need a new way to think about the spiritual side of our jobs, one that finds God's action not just in the what of our job title, but in the how we do our work, moment by moment, empowered by the Spirit.
Okay, so we've just been on a 500-year whirlwind tour. What's the big takeaway? Why on earth does any of this theological history matter to you on a Monday morning?
Well, you can see the whole journey right on this timeline. It starts with a radical idea, it becomes an engine for capitalism, and it evolves into a modern vision of a spiritual encounter at your desk. This is a living, breathing idea that is still shaping our world.
So the next time you feel that pressure to have a purpose-driven career, or you feel guilty because your job is just a job and not a calling, remember where that comes from.
That feeling has deep, powerful roots in the very ideas we've been talking about. We're all heirs to this way of thinking.
And that's really the bottom line here. Our relationship with our jobs has always been tangled up with life's biggest questions. What's my purpose? How do I contribute? Our modern work culture is basically haunted by these theological ghosts.
So that's the question I want to leave you with. Whether you're in a startup, a cubicle, or a workshop, how does this 500-year-old conversation about meaning and labor show up in your life? It's a pretty fascinating thing to think about as you head into your workday tomorrow.